This morning, the Princess of Wales back on the global stage. Kate's first international trip since her cancer recovery, stepping out on her own, a research trip of sorts, learning about a cause she cares deeply about.
Thousands of people have packed the square. People are hanging out the windows, and you can see her right here, meeting some of her littlest fans.
The Windsor Gala was supposed to be a night of grace, harmony, royal serenity, and rather, it was the point at which the palace was unable to conceal the crack within its own walls. With a gentle grace, Princess Catherine came in, but the moment Camilla entered the room, everything changed. In a matter of minutes, Catherine strolled past the guests, turned her back on the assembly, and silently left Windsor behind. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve deeper into what this actually means for the royal family. Catherine arrived next to William with a serenity that caused others to pause. The Windsor Gala was a formal royal event intended to demonstrate the family's continued unity in front of donors, diplomats, and dependable palace visitors. The night was important because of this. It sent a message to the nation that despite tensions tearing at its basis, the crown remained unwavering. William sensed the pressure right away. The prince could tell his bride wasn't scared because he saw her avoid the main entrance. She bided her time. Camilla was late, and her tardiness had significance. With her entourage trailing closely behind, the queen consort arrived like a woman determined to be seen rather than as a silent visitor. Catherine saw her right away. Setting down her drink, the princess turned to face William and uttered a few brief words. He stopped. Then her expression changed. Not with rage, but with the anguish of knowing that a promise had been broken. Camilla continued to advance while grinning resolutely. But before the room realized why the air had become chilly, her gaze followed Catherine. William glanced from Camilla to Catherine, and that moment turned into the crucial moment of the evening. He was required to stay close to the reception line due to protocol, the stringent code of royal behavior that specifies where family members should stand, when to talk, and how to preserve appearances. Loyalty required something different. Before any announcement could defuse the situation, Catherine moved away. Windsor seemed to gasp as she silently passed the doorway. The prince came after. He didn't ask permission. He did not turn around. When Camilla saw him leaving, everyone around her lost confidence. The news was delivered to Charles in a whisper that sliced like a knife through the ceremony. Leaning close to the king, a top aide informed him that Catherine had not left due to illness. Camilla had come, therefore she had left. When Charles did not respond and the monarch's expression hardened, the helper reiterated the statement. This wasn't an emotional outburst. The obvious tipping point of a conflict engulfing everyone closest to the throne was Catherine's walkout. 4 people, each with a different wound, stood in the middle of the storm behind Windsor's shimmering walls. Catherine was self-controlled. William was disciplined despite his anger. Camilla carried a fear-sharpened pride. The knowledge that the most dangerous division in the palace had been revealed by one woman's entrance weighed heavily on Charles. That evening's events had nothing to do with seating, timing, or ceremony. It was about humiliation, memory, and power. Catherine had not wanted that night to turn into yet another silent endurance test. Only after being reassured that the Windsor Gala would not become a show of Camilla's power had she consented to go. The purpose of the event was to demonstrate to trusted visitors, diplomats, and donors that the family still knew how to unite. Every public royal event becomes a statement, which is another reason it mattered. This one was meant to convey that the crown was at ease. However, Catherine was aware that composure might be used as a mask, and she had worn one far too frequently. William was the first to notice the tension. Catherine adjusted her bracelet in a side room prior to the gala, her hands appearing steady but bearing the burden of all the unsaid. "Are you sure you want to do this?" the prince inquired, keeping a careful eye on her. She took a while to respond. He was devastated by her response since he understood exactly what it cost her. She glanced down, took a deep breath, and responded, "For the family, yes." In private, William had witnessed Catherine being pushed to swallow insult after insult while she was under pressure in public. Camilla had a different goal as she stood on the opposite side of the night. The Queen Consort hesitated for a moment after an assistant informed her that Catherine was already inside. Then, because her arrival was more than just an arrival, she carried on with a restrained smile. Any ceremonial function when the family's rank, order, and public image are meticulously displayed through timing, placement, and behavior is considered a royal ceremony. No one knew that better than Camilla. She wanted the room to remember that she was still the focal point. Charles realized the risk too late. The king had hoped that the night would preserve the monarchy's reputation, because the monarchy relies not only on titles and crowns, but also on the conviction that its leaders are capable of overcoming personal injuries. That belief was put in jeopardy when Catherine left. It made personal suffering public. Charles did not perceive a husband merely trailing his wife when William departed after her. He witnessed the future monarch prioritizing loyalty over palace decoration. Camilla saw it too, and her face stiffened with pride. Charles realized that the meaning would spread more quickly than any formal explanation, because William had made his decision in front of everyone. The prince hadn't thought twice. The palace had made a valiant effort to conceal a private incident, which was the reason William moved so fast and Catherine had not returned. The Windsor Gala was not where the walkout started. It started a few weeks ago, behind closed doors during a private meal where a single statement permanently altered the royal family's mood. Whispers were nothing new for Catherine. She had put up with icy grins, cautious exclusions, and protocol conflicts. However, Catherine never completely forgave Camilla for crossing a line that night that William would never forget. With agonizing clarity, Catherine recalled the winter meal at Sandringham, one of the royal family's private country estates. Sandringham is frequently utilized for family get-togethers away from the public eye. And that's why the meal was so important. It wasn't a noisy public gathering where pressure might be attributed to speech. It wasn't public. It was managed. It was private. Camilla made the comment that would come back to haunt Windsor while seated with a few chosen family members. Catherine was too sensitive to be queen in the future. Catherine heard all the words. She kept her voice down. In front of the table, she failed to defend herself. She just lowered her gaze, folded her napkin, and allowed silence to do what rage was unable to. William noticed the shift. The prince was aware that his wife had been hurt in a location she was unable to readily display. Camilla went on as if the punishment had been insignificant, but the night had already been altered by the Queen Consort. She had made a family meal into a test of Catherine's musical abilities. After supper, William addressed Camilla. His remarks were not silent, but the hallway was. He assured her that Catherine would never again be used in royal politics as a test of endurance. Camilla responded. The family needed strength, not sentiment, with a strong demeanor. Emotion was a weakness to her. He saw it as humanity. The future king had seen Catherine steer the family's reputation through storms she never caused, so that distinction was significant. He also realized that brutality and strength were not synonymous. The following morning, Charles learned about the altercation from a written report written by a senior domestic helper. A valued palace employee who oversees confidential royal schedules, messages, and delicate family concerns is known as a household assistant. After reading the story, the monarch decided to remain silent. Catherine was more hurt by that quiet than by Camilla's remarks. Charles desired peace, but in the absence of the facts, peace seemed to shield the one who had inflicted the harm. Later, Catherine took off her earrings silently while standing by herself with William. The prince waited, aware that she was struggling to hold back. William never forgot what she said after that. "I can stand pressure, but I will not stand cruelty dressed as duty." He realized what Catherine was truly asking, even though she didn't ask him to fight her wars. Never again should the palace transform suffering into formality. It was intended to keep Camilla's attendance at the Windsor Gala under wraps. After that, Catherine only consented to go because she had been assured that the Queen Consort's arrival would be respectful, discreet, and under control. Catherine realized that the pledge had already been violated when Camilla entered Windsor as if nothing had happened. Though she had departed the gala, Catherine was still there. William caught up to her next to a locked door, and Camilla trailed after a short while later. The encounter that Windsor was most afraid about was what followed. Before she could reach the outer tunnel, Catherine halted. She leaned one hand on the wall as if she required Windsor's stone power to stay upright, and her breathing was deliberate, controlled, and almost too serene. A few seconds later, William arrived at her, his rage simmering beneath each word he chose not to yell. The estate was more than simply a building, therefore the prince inquired if she wanted to leave it completely. In only 1 minute, family suffering might become public history on this royal turf. Catherine's calm gaze on William was more painful than tears. She didn't appear damaged. She appeared resolved. That was significant, since the palace has always managed to heal wounds before anyone outside could identify them. It was significant because the future king realized that this wound could not be healed. Catherine had already shielded herself by leaving the chamber behind them, despite the prince's desire to keep her safe. Before the silence could last, Camilla came in. She was closely followed by one assistant, but William quickly turned and told the assistant to move away. That directive was risky, since an aide is a trusted member of the royal staff who manages schedules, secret messages, and delicate situations. The typical buffer was removed. There was now no one to soften the words, no one to later change the memories, and no one to act as though this was just a miscommunication. Without speaking, Catherine turned to Camilla. She remarked, "You knew what that dinner cost me." The queen consort stood her ground and responded that private pain could not be accommodated by public responsibility. The old logic of the palace stood like a wall between them for a minute. Obligation, quiet, and perseverance. William, however, moved forward to draw the line the family had been avoiding for far too long, not to attack or perform. William informed Camilla that no one was authorized by duty to degrade his wife. His comments carried the weight of a decision down the hallway. The queen consort made an effort to remain calm, but when Catherine spoke once more, her confidence wavered. She said that she hadn't gone outside to make a fuss. Staying would have made the insult acceptable, so she had left. When Camilla noticed the change, she didn't immediately respond for the first time that evening. As the last words faded, Charles emerged at the far end of the hallway. The king was informed of everything by the fact that William was standing next to Catherine rather than between the two women. The prince had decided on his position. Catherine had made a decision that she could no longer bear. Although Camilla had followed, she had lost control of the situation. Charles now had to choose between calming the situation or facing the more profound reality that Catherine's departure had exposed. Every royal crisis ultimately turns into a power struggle. The power that is demonstrated by who moves, who remains, who follows, and who is left standing by themselves, not the power that is written down. Catherine's walkout at Windsor revealed something the palace had refrained from making public. William felt unwilling to act, as though the monarchy's emotional core had not changed. With the night's weight bearing down on him, Charles withdrew from the hallway. The king read a brief written report made by a top aide in a secluded sitting area before putting it down silently. Before a formal explanation is developed, palace employees use written accounts, which are formal internal notes, to document sensitive incidents. That was significant because the events were not lessened by this note. The palace was no longer able to conceal the walkout as a private misunderstanding, because it was proven that several guests had witnessed Catherine go after Camilla arrived. Charles recognized the danger, which is why he appeared shaken. Control is essential to the monarchy's survival, and control rests on people's perception that the family can hide its suffering. But Catherine had not disappeared in silence. She had left a room full of loyal visitors, donors, and diplomats who were aware of royal signals. They had observed Camilla's entrance. It had been observed that William had chosen to follow. The monarch now knew that everyone who saw it would ask the same question at home. Had the future monarch simply chosen his spouse instead of the line of succession? Soon after, William was called, but the prince did not quickly return to make things right. Through a private message that an assistant gave, he clarified his response. He refused to back any official explanation that placed the blame on Catherine and would not go back to the ballroom until her position was honored. The palace's public account of events, which is typically produced to shield the family from controversy, is called an official explanation. This time, William will not allow Catherine's suffering to become weakness due to that machine. Camilla anticipated Charles's defense of her. The Queen Consort waited for the king to confirm that her attendance at the gala had been appropriate, but she could tell he was hesitant. She was more afraid of that pause than of rage. Charles was considering more than just a daughter-in-law against a bride. The future had just left the room behind Catherine, and he was balancing the present against the future. Charles made the decision in private, but it had a profound impact. He gave the staff instructions not to release a statement stating that Catherine was ill. The king was aware that William would not endorse a fabrication and that any palace statement would fall apart on its own without the prince's backing. Camilla heard the command and deciphered the subliminal message. Catherine's departure would not be considered an annoyance. They would treat it with respect. When Charles finally posed the question that everyone was afraid of, the room fell silent. Camilla's arrival time was approved by whom? At first, no one responded. The help lowered his gaze. Camilla stilled. William's refusal had compelled the palace to begin looking into power instead of controlling emotion. The walkout was transformed from an emotional breakdown into a palace inquiry that nobody around Camilla intended to be opened by just one question. The gala went on, but it was no longer a joyous occasion. Carefully broken conversations resumed. However, everyone in Windsor was aware that the evening's main character had vanished. Speech was drowned out by the emptiness of Catherine's house. Camilla, who was still in the room, started to realize that staying had not made her stronger as William's absence turned into a message. The guests made an effort to act as if the night hadn't broken. They looked too frequently at the chair Catherine had left behind, spoke too quietly, and smiled too cautiously. The king was supposed to thank the guests and reiterate the significance of the occasion during the formal toast, which was a brief ceremonial speech. The gala had been planned to demonstrate stability following weeks of stress, so this moment was crucial. It was significant because, even before Charles started, that message was hollow due to the absence of Catherine and William. Charles raised his glass, but his voice had lost its warmth. Everyone in the room could sense how phony the phrase, unity, would sound, so the monarch avoided using it. When one ambassador saw that William was not coming back to stand next to the monarch, he ceased applauding. Open protest was less powerful than that little pause. Charles was informed that the guests had deciphered the signal. There was no cover for Catherine's departure. Silence had not pardoned the prince's absence. Camilla stood close to the receiving line, her smile becoming stronger by the moment. The talks surrounding her grew colder and shorter as the Queen Consort gripped her clutch hard. They continued to bow. People continued to talk, but the casual deference had given way to cautious distance. She had come to demonstrate that she was still the center of attention. She was standing in the same room now, experiencing the swift transformation of power into loneliness when the subject of everyone's attention was gone. When Sophie saw the chair was empty, she looked down. The confidant who was trusted knew what others were just starting to experience. Because she craved attention, Catherine hadn't left. Staying would have transformed suffering into a performance, therefore she had left. Sophie had spent years reading the family's secret language, so her silence was significant. She could tell when a lady had finally run out of things to carry, when a grin was forced, and when a gesture was courteous. Camilla leaned over to ask if Catherine had completely left Windsor. After a moment of hesitation, the assistant responded, "The prince is with her." It was more hurtful than any public insult. It proved that William had not been back to fix the damage. It proved he wasn't standing next to Charles to preserve the knight's reputation. Everyone who could hear him was aware that the future king had prioritized emotional truth over regal appearance while he was with Catherine. Before Camilla could get to him, Charles heard Anne stealthily exit the ballroom. Because Anne did not stroll aimlessly, the king watched her with concerned eyes. Catherine was not being pursued by the Princess Royal, a senior royal recognized for her directness and responsibility. She intended to visit Charles. The situation had progressed from damaged sentiments to the question of what the family would put up with next by the time Anne arrived at the king. The pivotal moment did not occur as a result of a formal order, a palace proclamation, or a show of unanimity on stage. It took place in a tiny, private chamber where two people conversed without the burden of ceremony, witnesses, or aides. After the walkout, Catherine and William turned to face one another, and the monarchy vanished for the first time that evening. There was just a husband and wife. Deeply hurt, but no longer furious, Catherine sat silently away from the festivities. William asked her to act calm once more, while standing close to the door, as though the entire palace may try to enter. The prince kept a close eye on her, aware that this particular moment was significant because it was no longer about a single entry or meal. It was significant because Catherine had been urged to bear suffering in silence for the sake of royal decree, and she had declined this time. William moved in closer and informed Catherine that he ought to have intervened sooner. The palace was not protected by the prince. Camilla's role wasn't softened by him. He merely acknowledged the expression of guilt that was already on his face. The walkout was not a weakness, Catherine murmured, glancing at him. It was the first sincere action of the evening. He was more affected by that truth than by anger, since it revealed to him how long she had been maintaining her composure while everyone else referred to it as duty. Catherine took off her gala gloves and set them down. A gala is a formal evening event where the royal family appears in front of visitors to promote causes, demonstrate unity, and safeguard the public image of the crown. The gesture felt so strong because of this. The gloves had been part of the evening's act. By putting them down, Catherine was putting an end to the notion that suffering had to be handled with grace, music, in order to make others feel at ease. William acknowledged that a storm might result from following her. In a low voice, Catherine replied that the storm was already there. Everyone could only see it from the walkout. At that moment, the prince realized that handling this problem with tactful words was no longer an option. It required bravery to respond. He thought like a future monarch all night, but he had to act like a husband first in that room. William was not asked by Catherine to punish Camilla. He was amazed by that restraint. She was hurt by the Queen consort, challenged her, and showed up at Windsor as if the broken promise didn't matter. Nevertheless, Catherine made a single request. She wished that no one would ever again turn her dignity into a royal annoyance. The prince sensed the subtle impulse underlying that request, and he was aware that it would influence every subsequent choice. For a brief period, the pressure outside the room subsided as William reached for Catherine's hand. The palace wouldn't hold her accountable, he assured her. Not in secret, not in public, and not with a polished justification meant to shield everyone but the injured woman. He had already made up his mind, so Catherine trusted him. He was out of the room. He had trailed behind her. Before the palace could mold the narrative, the first photograph made its way to broadcasters. Catherine departs from Windsor. William was right behind. No denial, no speech, and no timely controlled version. By daybreak, the world had taken over what had started inside the palace walls, and the silence of Windsor had given way to a national roar. Britain did not wake up to a palace explanation the following morning. One image came to mind when it woke up. Catherine walking out of Windsor, her face pallid, her posture unwavering, William trailing closely behind. That one moment turned into the whole narrative. There was nothing to ease it. No briefing could hide it. The audience witnessed a future king choosing to walk with a woman who was fleeing shame. Before the palace had even decided on its opening line, Catherine's name was on every top page. The image appeared in the Crown Ledger under the heading, "The Walkout That Shook the Palace." A newspaper's front page is its first and most significant page, and editors use it when they think a story has caught the nation's attention. That was significant because Catherine's departure had transcended personal suffering into a national issue. It was significant because William's presence behind her elevated the occasion beyond mere rumors. It turned into a display of loyalty. Without a word, William altered the narrative. The scenario was described by a morning broadcaster as a royal boundary rather than a royal tantrum, and the word gained popularity because it provided people with the vocabulary that the palace would not use. To preserve the unity impression, the prince had not stayed inside. Because he had chosen to follow his wife, Catherine was viewed by the public as dignified rather than rebellious. She didn't yell. She hadn't shown fury. Simply put, she had fled the room that demanded too much of her. By noon, crowds had gathered outside the gates of Windsor Castle. One of the most significant royal residences in the monarchy, Windsor Castle is utilized for crucial rituals, intimate family moments, and public symbols of continuity. The assembly felt weighty because of this. A few people gave Catherine flowers. Others watched the gates in silence while listening to music, as though silence itself had taken on a message. The public's response extended beyond a dramatic departure. They were responding to the impression that a woman had at last refused to allow pain to be disguised as obligation. Camilla saw the change right away. The date of her arrival was often replayed by commentators, who subsequently linked it to the Sandringham winter dinner, where her comment that Catherine was too emotional for future queenship had initially escalated personal friction into a more serious wound. The Queen Consort had entered Windsor with the intention of demonstrating her continued importance in the center of the room. Rather, the nation started to wonder if her appearance had shown the very aloofness the palace had attempted to conceal. Every word now bore peril, so Charles went cautiously. The king approved a restrained palace message that acknowledged Catherine's early departure from the gala, but did not accuse her of being ill. A palace note is a brief official statement disseminated to influence public opinion without disclosing all personal information. The stillness of this particular piece of music was more protective of Catherine than any denial could have been. The Queen did not let her suffering become a sickness. Camilla was not given an easy defense by him. For a long time, Catherine remained silent after seeing the front page in private. William stood close to her, observing how the words affected her expression. She was not seeing triumph, and the prince knew it. She could see evidence. Evidence that what Windsor attempted to soften had been understood by the public. Evidence that she hadn't seemed weak by leaving. She appeared sincere as a result. And this comprehension gave the walkout its ultimate significance as a judgment on the future of the monarchy rather than as a scandal. By departing, Catherine had not harmed the crown. She had reminded it that the audience could discern the difference between choreography and dignity. Ultimately, the people who chose not to stay at the Windsor Gala were remembered more than those who showed up. Catherine's walkout transcended the realm of royal affairs. It turned into a silently drawn line. A future queen demonstrated that endurance has its limitations in a moment where dignity triumphed over choreography. That evening, the monarchy did not fall, but something within it permanently altered. It was brutally obvious where Catherine would end up. Because of her fragility, she hadn't left. Because staying would have made rudeness seem acceptable, she had departed. That was significant because the palace had spent years encouraging women to put up with pressure in silence, which they subsequently referred to as strength. It also mattered because Catherine had demonstrated a new sort of strength that refrained from yelling, pleading, or collapsing. She just declined to cause her suffering, a courteous grin for the consolation of others. The intensity of that rejection came from William's choice. The prince followed Catherine as a commitment rather than a show. He demonstrated that forsaking his wife's honor for appearances would not be the foundation of the crown's future. The monarchy's duty, image, and future are all represented by the crown, which is a symbol of regal authority. For William, pretending suffering was loyalty could no longer be the basis for that future. This time, he picked Catherine over the room because he had witnessed the cost of silence. Camilla had to deal with the fallout from her arrival. In an attempt to project authority, dominance, and presence, the Queen Consort had invaded Windsor. Rather, when Catherine left and William went with her, she showed how solitary her influence had become. Camilla had hoped that the music would turn to face her, but as soon as she walked in, the room started to gauge the impact of her presence. No statement could lessen that punishment. Although she remained inside the event, Catherine had already lost the emotional impact. The hardest lesson of the evening was taught to Charles. The king realized that humiliation would be easier for the palace to endure than moral weakness. Cowardice leaves an imprint on everyone who is asked to suffer in silence, yet embarrassment goes away. Charles had spent the crisis attempting to defend the institution, therefore that truth was important. However, Catherine's departure demonstrated that the institution could only be safeguarded by acknowledging its mistakes. Honesty was the monarch's only option. Catherine stood with William as Charles entered the private room the following morning, despite the fact that honesty damaged the palace's reputation. The king stopped before continuing, and for once, the situation wasn't made any easier. It didn't have a palace note. No ritual concealed it. With a calm force, he turned to face Catherine and said simply, "You were right to leave." When William turned to face his wife, Catherine initially did not smile. She just took in what the palace had at last acknowledged. The walkout uprising was not called by Charles. He hadn't described it as a weakness. He referred to it as truth, because it reaffirmed what Catherine had known when she passed that threshold. That line provided the story with its emotional closure. By avoiding disgrace, she had not caused harm to the kingdom. She had reminded it that maintaining one's dignity should never be viewed as a challenge. The Windsor Gala proved to be an important event. The person in charge of arrival, timing, and control does not own the destiny of the monarchy. It belongs to the individual who has the courage to leave a room that needs quiet. Although Catherine was a wounded lady when she left Windsor, the palace understood that she had grown into a stronger future queen. Thank you for viewing. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.